A win for the Socceroos at long last in the third stage of World Cup qualification. Maybe a bit dramatic, but given the frantic nature of events since the last international window, it sure feels apt. A 3-1 win over China at Adelaide Oval will allow for slight relief, but a massive duel against Japan awaits in 5 days' time. A new system, new personnel, it certainly was a shake-up. From there, we'll go to part 2 of our A-League men's preview series, last year's grand finalists, the Mariners, and the victory, as well as new kids on the block, Auckland FC, under the microscope today. Melbourne City are through to the quarterfinals of the AFC Women's Champions League. MacArthur are hit with a transfer ban from FIFA, and the APL hit a home run with the new 20th season anniversary promotions on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. My name is Lachlan, Avil, and joining me tonight, fresh off the final whistle in Adelaide, Christian, we've dressed up for the occasion tonight. Hello to you.
Yeah, I think I've dressed up the best, I must admit. My retro kit from, 20 years ago. Obviously brought us good luck and, just good to see off it with the win because obviously Popovich needed a good start to his tenure as coach of the Socceroos, and he certainly got that.
Will Booth, hello to you. So often when a new coach comes in, you just want to see performances, but the reality of the situation that we're in at the moment is that we needed a win as well, and we got that tonight.
Yeah, and the start of the performance can be down to just a failure to execute. But I think overall, the result was what we were after, and we got that. So a great way to kick off his reign.
And finally, Poletti as well. Hello, are we all good? The Socceroos are back on track. World Cup, no problem.
New manager bounce. Well, it's what I've been saying this entire time since Popovich was announced. New manager bounce. Let's go.
Of course, it's never quite that simple, but we'll delve into it here. Chris Macpherson will join us a little later on as well, but we'll, of course, start with the Socceroos. There were some big changes straight away when we saw the team sheet, Christian, trying to put together some different names. Joe Gauci jumps off the page, comes in as goalkeeper ahead of Matthew Ryan. When we figure out how many defenders we have on the park, obviously it wasn't going to be a normal back four. Instead, it was this 3-5-2, 5-2-3, whatever you want to call it. 3 central defenders with your wing backs going up the field, Irvine and O'Neill in midfield, and then you got a front 3 of Duke, Irankunda, and Goodwin, but crucially Goodwin and Irankunda on opposite wings as well, and really playing in those half spaces down in those kind of middle areas of the field, so they could hit shots at goal with the right foot, and that ended up proving pretty good dividends in the end, especially for Craig Goodwin.
Yeah, definitely. There were a few experimentations, you can say, from this match, and the one that glared out the most was Joe Gauci. Obviously Matt Ryan, he's been such a stalwart of this Socceroos setup. Obviously being captain of the side for how many number of years now. He's such a leader and experienced veteran, you can call him now, in this Socceroos side. And to make that change, I know it's against China, but still takes a bit of courage to do that, especially when the Socceroos went 1-0 down. You thought, okay, this is a question that could be posed to Popovich to say, why did you experiment this much in this particular game when you need to win? But no, full credit to Gauci. I mean, to be fair to him, he didn't really have much to do after he conceded that goal. But for the rest of the team, you mentioned that Goodwin and Irankunda playing on opposite sides of the flanks. I mean, I think that gave them both a real opportunity to cut inside, link up, obviously, with Duke, for example, and just, I guess, mix it up a bit. But in saying that, getting into the final third, I said in the live stream, it's just a lack of cutting edge and predictability about us that you just can't put a finger on, because we saw it under Arnold as well. And I guess there might be a bit of a fear amongst some fans that, okay, are we getting a similar vibe or a similar type of football that we saw under Graham Arnold with Tony Popovich? You can't fault his changes in the second half. Obviously Nish getting his goal, there was a lot of doubts about him, why he got a call up for the Socceroos, but we saw, the argument posed as to why he chose him, because Popovich has worked under him in previous seasons with victory. He knows what he's going to get out of him. And in these sort of pressure type environments where you need results so critically at this stage of the qualifiers, because of the drop points that occurred, previously in the first 2 games, that's part of the reason why. And I'm happy for Nish that he got his goal. Good one with an absolute worldie as well. South Australian great I'm sure they'll be calling him for the next few days. And all in all, I guess, at times the possession was slow, but that's expected from a Popovic side. And especially being his first game in charge, the squad were going to be a bit nervy heading in. But I just love the response in the second half. And hopefully we can carry over this good momentum over to the Japan game next week.
I think, Will, on the theme of experimentation, I don't think we can draw too many conclusions before we see what happens in the Japan game, because obviously Popovic gets a handful of training sessions and maybe one with his actual full squad available. So he doesn't get to do as much experimentation in training. So he has to use games to do that. So whether Joe Gauci and Matt Ryan are considered pretty close in competition, and you give one game to one and the other has the other, well, then you're always going to start Joe Gauci in this one in Adelaide, right? So maybe there's some experimentation. We don't know if it's actually personnel preference yet. I feel like we have to wait another few days until we make those decisions.
Yeah, too small of a sample size to draw conclusions from at this stage, but no doubt fans will do that. The Gauci, conversation is one that will continue on, no matter who kind of takes that role and who plays the next game will be interesting, as you said. But Gauci was definitely even early on, straight away into the game, he was playing these tight little passing combinations with the back line right in his in his 6-yard box and taking risks that we have maybe not have seen Matt Ryan if he was in the same position. So it was a confident kind of opening and display so early. So it's good to see that he kind of backs himself with that, and that is an extra element that can be added to that position that maybe we haven't utilized so much. We haven't really, we don't usually get pressed up the field that high, so it's not necessarily required. But it was good to see that they were building phases out from the back, being confident in that rather than trying to skip lines straight away and kind of maybe feed the wing backs, over the top. So no, that one worked. I think another part of the experimentation that maybe didn't really pay off today was that Iran Kunda and Goodwin in these new roles as kind of the inside forwards. Iran Kunda was taken off at halftime. Goodwin, I think, can operate in these positions. It probably remains to be seen. I want to see those two get another chance against maybe a different setup where they will have more space in the corridor to create and play between the lines and take more of a bigger touch without a man right on them. Iran Kunda is probably the questionable one there for me. As I said, McGree came on and did look really comfortable in that space. That's what he's used to doing for all of his sides that he's played for. He's used to being receiving on the half turn in that little narrow corridor there. His combinations with Boss as well when Boss came on were really, really positive. The width really once Boss came on, the width that he provided over Beich, it was noticeable straight away. I think Boss was straight away one of the best players. And I think that's another personnel conversation that we'll have many conversations about coming into the Japan game if Boss does get that starting role. Because, he was instrumental in the third goal with his work rate down the left. And he got on the end of a ball, was able to work it into the box where, the goal came from a rebound from a late midfield run, a shot on the edge of the box there. So it was exciting to see Boss, and I think in this system he plays to a lot of his strengths, and I think that's what time will tell if this system can get the best out of the players, because we're seeing a few of them in unique roles today, especially. So no, it will be something to keep an eye on, compared with this lineup to the next, to see who kind of is preferred in these new look areas.
One thing we know about Poletti is that during games he doesn't usually like to switch up his formation. It'll usually be when he brings up changes off the bench, it'll usually be 1-for-1 and slotting players in and out. And to build on Will's point there, I think we actually did learn a lot from some of the substitutions that he made. Boss over Beich seems like an obvious one to me, and I know it appears like an obvious one to a lot of people as well. Jason Guerrier came in for Thomas Steng, who received his first start in a little while. He looked okay, probably a little shaky defensively. Jason Guerrier came on and I thought improved upon Deng's performance in the first half. So that's an interesting one to see him sit at right centre back. Obviously, with Jakarta out of the team for a long time, that has to be a long-term consideration. McGree for Irankunda. I don't really put a lot of blame on Nesta for that one. He's playing in an unusual position. I think he did the best he could, but McGree is just so suited to playing in those tight spaces that he deserves the starting spot there as well. So I think those three players in particular, Boss, Geria, and McGree, really impressed in the second half, and I think they've increased their reputation.
Oh, I absolutely think they have, and I don't know when all the players sort of arrived into camp, but we know a lot of the players arrived late. Some of them, I believe, arriving as late as Wednesday morning local time. So, it was very hard for a lot of players for Tony to be able to look at a lot of the players, right? Because you only get really the one training session with them. If you're trying to assess, okay, who do I start, who do I not? I don't know a lot of these players. Like, I know their strengths and everything like that, but like he hasn't seen a lot of them with his own eyes in quite some time in person. So those are the sorts of questions that you have to balance and you have to manage. And I think for some of them, it's probably a case of starting in Adelaide, like particularly Irankunda. But I said this on the live stream. I think it would be much better off having Irankunda coming off the bench last 20 minutes, just absolutely rip defenses apart. We saw last season for Adelaide absolutely lethal, and I know a lot of people were calling for him to start last season, but I very much likened it to Arzani ahead of and during the 2018 World Cup, where everyone was calling for him to start, and it's like, well, no, that's not how this works, right? And you can't just change a player's match fitness overnight, right? Like, I know someone like Irankunda, has been playing good minutes in Germany, whereas, Arzani prior to that World Cup, most of his appearances for Melbourne City were off the bench. And so, jumping into a starting role is setting someone up for failure. And I think that's sort of what Popovich has done here. It's not setting him up for failure in the sense of, a poor performance, but in the context of the game, out of position, starting, there's a lot of pressure on him. And I think his performance wasn't as good as it could have been tonight had he come on at halftime or, with half an hour to go. Overall, I don't have too much of a problem with Popovich's personnel decisions, but I think a lot of that is just results-based analysis. This would be something that when you take away the euphoria of first win in the third round of World Cup qualifying, first goal scored, you take the emotion out of it, and you look back on this game, tomorrow or on Saturday or on Sunday, and actually have a look at it. That I think you'd probably get a little bit more critical or tactical analysis wise, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the Irankunda one is interesting because in this formation that they played tonight with the wingbacks occupying the wide spaces, he and Goodwin were asked exclusively to cut inside and stay inside the central areas of the field, which is, not at least where we've seen Nesta have great amounts of success, at least in the A-League. I know he's been played a little bit central in the Socceroos and a Bayern shirt before. But it adds the question if this is the way Popovich wants to play, then where do these wide wingers that Australia have, historically been very good at producing, where do they fit into this setup? Are they only going to be able to play on the inside of the park? If you've got Geordie Boss bowling up the left, then probably, you got to stay inside. But do they have any license to get outside into wide areas? Is another thing you have to think about. In terms of other players coming off the bench, Christian, we saw these guys come on and make really good impacts and improve their reputation. Do you think Stamatolopoulos can feel a little bit hard done by? He's been in the Australia setup before. He's just scored his first goal for Motherwell at the weekend, coming off the back of a really good A-League season. Instead, Volupale is the one that gets the opportunity, takes his chance very well and scores a goal. But if you look at the substitution in isolation, should it have been Stammer that was afforded that chance?
Yeah, Stammer, I think, can feel very hard done by. That he, wasn't the first option that Popa, it came to his mind instead. Obviously opted for Nish, but at the same time, we discussed it as well. We said that it's sort of not really a surprise because of the working relationship that Popa and Nish have. And that's no sort of bias or player bias to a certain extent. That's just, going off what you know and, what this player can bring in that given moment. And it was 2-1 at that stage. So it wasn't like the game was wrapped up or anything like that. And in that sense, it probably made more sense to put Stammer on, just to see up the result, because Nish, obviously that was his international debut. We didn't really quite know what to expect from him. So I mean, yeah, Stammer scored a really good goal over the weekend. I think it was against Hibs in the Scottish League. If you haven't watched it, please give it a watch. It was an absolute banger. But in terms of what he can bring, I think if he came on, it would have just offered the Socceroos a bit more of a physical presence, a bit similar to what Mitch Duke gave us for however many minutes he was on the pitch for. But I mean, perhaps against Japan, maybe he's saving him for that game because, for example, if Duke does start that game against Japan, does he look to Stammer as a substitute late in the second half to keep holding the ball up and display those similar attributes that Duke does possess? Because I do think against Japan, Australia, you'd expect will be on the back foot for a lot of the game, just trying to absorb that pressure away from home, and then look to someone like Duke or Stammer just to, up top, just to hold the ball up and bring others into play. Otherwise, I don't think Popa's system will work as effectively on the road, on the counter, in transition. So, from that point, I think he can be hard done by, but at the same time, it's not a real surprise to see Nish get his debut.
Well, just on that, you talk about the idea of Popovic's system not necessarily being effective on the road. I've just seen a post come across my timeline on Twitter. I want to give a shout out here to @Canby_2, who's taken Opta data here. The cumulative open play expected goals for the Australia v China game across the 90 minutes. China 0.22 xg. Socceroos 0.60 xg. That's cumulative across the entire game from open play. 73% possession. You just, I know I've been highly critical of XG before, and I will probably continue to be highly critical of XG, but that doesn't necessarily paint a pretty picture, does it?
No, it doesn't. And look, Goodwin's goal was from a long way out. Miller scored one of those goals from a set pieces that sometimes you just need.
So that's not really an open play goal, so you have to discredit that one.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just one of those goals that happen every once in a while, and you get lucky, and this is the game that you score one, and it gets you back into it. And you're right, no, the XG wasn't high. They spent a lot of time in the final third passing the ball around in short areas, and then failing to make a decisive pass. And if they did, it was just picked off. So look, there's work to be done, and this is very new for a lot of these players, like getting really, really close to one another and playing one-touch football, and it's going to take a little while, but there are definitely signs.
I've got a question, if I can cut in for all of you. Sorry, if I can just say, in Popa's inaugural press conference, he said, if Australia win, that's even more reason to question where we can improve and do better. From this performance now, obviously that we've won 3-1, what do you think Popa will go back and reflect and think, okay, we've won the game, but what can we actually do better in the next game against Japan or in future?
Poletti, that's the the benefit of XG. It kind of shows that we didn't have enough chances. We didn't have enough shots. We didn't.
But not necessarily.
Struggled in that.
I haven't seen the shots yet, but I mean, it's more.
We just did it. We didn't have that many shots. Even the first half, you didn't miss any. But you barely. Missed any.
I was just going to say more high quality chances.
High quality, yeah, 100%. And it's we took the chances we had, and the header was fortunate, and Goodwin's long range strike obviously saved us and was well needed in that time for momentum overall in the match. But yeah, it was definitely the producing of that, or the quality of that final ball that leads to a shot, because we just didn't have that many.
So there you go. So 13 shots, 3 on target, and all 3 were successfully converted. So it tells you the 10 shots that probably weren't the greatest. I know a couple, take a deflection, pull off a bad angle, stuff like that. But weren't going on target, right? So I think more clinical finishing. If you've got to be able to test a goalkeeper more at an international level, right?
But you also got to shoot and miss because you're playing the percentages, and you're going to miss some. You're going to get some on target as well, and I think it was really due to the creativity, and we talked about that a lot. And obviously, we talked about McGree and Hrustic coming into the squad. Neither of them started in this game, largely due to the formation that was asked. Like, we always think about those kind of number 10 positions being the ones that have to provide the creativity. Well, with these wing backs in the system, that's a new avenue for the creativity. So obviously McGree did come in for Irankunda in that kind of inside forward role and did very well. But that's not the only way to go now for the Socceroos. And previously it was wing play with the high wingers, and now it's these wing backs that come out of defence. So there's lots of things to be learnt, I'm sure, and lots of ways to progress. Before we move on from the Socceroos, a quick shout out: the PFA awarded their Players of the Year over the last week. Jackson Irvine and Steph Catley for the Men's and Women's Player of the Year, and then Alex Paulson and Mary Fowler as well for the Youth Players. Congratulations to them. That'll do on the Socceroos for tonight. We'll preview the Japan game in much more detail on Tuesday. But for now, we're going to go to part 2 of our A-League men's preview for the 24-25 season. Well, let's start with Central Coast.
Yeah, so it's tough to where do you go from last season? I mean, they did everything, they achieved everything they set out to do, and they set such a high bar for themselves that coming into this season, it's everything seems like a worry. Every little result kind of you're stressing over, and everything's scrutinized just that little better, a little bit more coming in as champions and premiers as well. So definitely there's some high expectations this year, but you look at that Mariners project every year, you have to kind of view it as a different kind of project every season, that it changes that much, that there's so much turnover, and they have to sell to stay financially viable as well. So they are a development club, and we saw with the players that have left. So a lot of key players this season, the homegrown ones, hurt the most. It's a lot of big names this year, especially. So you've got Nisbet leaving, Farrell, Max Ballard, Vukovic retiring as well. Couldn't have done one more season. But yeah, so you've got such massive turnover that it's a new team every year. So you have to kind of view the last season as just completely different to this season until we kind of can see what we get on the field. The signings have they're there. Every kind of area has been addressed so far. So they've got a new keeper in Pavlicic, but his performances have been shaky at best so far, and he's got that red in his last in that Champions League game. So not looking as solid as it was with Vukovic there in goal. Other positions have been addressed. The attack largely stays the same. They don't need to. They didn't need to sign another striker, for example. They've still got Quoll and Edmondson up top this year. I know that Nisbet was playing alongside the striker a lot last season, but yeah, other players can fill that role. He can go for two out and out strikers next to each other, or another creative player. So he's played Bradley Tapp up there a bit so far this season. Bantman, sorry, he's played in that role, in that Nisbet role, a little bit in preseason. But yeah, it's going to be you come in this year, just I don't know, you have to, as I mentioned, kind of reset your expectations. The preseason form has not really inspired too much confidence so far. So an early exit out of the Australia Cup to Heidelberg, they should have won that game. I think on most other days they do take their chances and win that one. But the Champions League performances especially have been a bit underwhelming. So a lot to work on, and we've seen in the Jackson projects, of the past year, it was the same story with their 4 losses in the first 4 games. So I think it'll just take time for this team to get clicking. But under Jackson, we saw that he can build something special. So yeah, give it a bit of time, and I think something special could come together.
So when you say that they've brought the players in, obviously we look at the different areas of the field, as you say, that they've lost players. Yes, they've brought some in, but in almost every aspect of the field, you'd have to say it's a downgrade, right? Maybe you see Trent Sainsbury come in, obviously club legend, past Socceroo captain. You could argue his ability to Dan Hall, and maybe that's the upgrade position, the one you get. But, he didn't play the last game in the Asian Champions League Elite through injury. We're not sure exactly what the status of that may be. We're hearing some rumours that potentially it could be a decent chunk of time. You take him out of the equation and, yes, they've got their squad numbers back up, but the quality has almost dropped in every single position, right?
Yeah, it's harsh, but probably true. I mean, I think the drop off is noticeable right away. It will be instantly. It'll have an instant impact, right, on the quality. But I think the signings that have come in, I think they have the potential to not be a downgrade. I think that a lot of them do have the potential to even improve on what we saw. I think you named it with Sainsbury just there, right? Like if he, is the player that we know he can be, that's an upgrade on Dan Hall straight away. Moragas in at left back, it's not necessarily an upgrade, but he offers something different. It's a different upside of his game to Farrell. If Jackson's able to get the best out of Moragas there, then you've got a dominant right attacking side with Docker pushing up from right back if he plays there, and you've got Lucas joining the attack as well and offering something else that may be Farrell. That was probably Farrell's weakest area, was the attacking output. It was very good, but that's not where the point of where he came from. So I think the signings offer different things that Jackson will have to figure out how to get the best out of them as well. You got McAlmont coming in, the Ballard replacement kind of in the middle of the field. Different players, a different kind of player, but I think McAlmont looks like he wants to dictate play a lot more. Ballard was somebody who he's a player where, if you don't notice him, that means he's having a good game, right? He's just everywhere kind of putting out fires a little bit like that, but not so much with the ball. He wasn't that progressive passer, fancy passer, necessarily, but McAlmont does look like he wants the play going through him a lot. So I think, you're right in saying that there's going to be downgrades, but I think they can get, Jackson can get just another tune out of these players and maybe tweak the tactical setup that they had the season before.
So, I mean, one of the biggest weaknesses I see from this Mariners side coming into this season is the experience, right? Because when the Mariners won the championship first time around under Nick Montgomery, the old cliche is true, right? It's, once you win that championship, teams are on your back, you become the hunted, the Mariners, that is, and it's so difficult to go back to back. We see it in so many different sports, not just football. So the fact that the Mariners did win the treble was an achievement in itself, really, in the way they did it, the style of football. But now the loss of Danny Vukovic, obviously former club captain, he's left the club. And even a player like Josh Nisbet, even he's in his mid-20s now, he's gone to Scotland, but he's been in the Mariners setup for quite a few years now. And even to have someone like him depart the club, surely that's a blow for just that experience side of it in that dressing room, to have these new players come in. I know Mark Jackson, he's proven last season that he can mold a good team, from new players and really incorporate a good style of football in a short amount of time. But how worrying is that for you, Will, those departures in terms of the experience?
Yeah, that's the biggest concern for sure. So it's something you can't really replace with signings is the knowledge of that club and kind of growing up through there. Nisbet, Farrell, Ballard all kind of came through the club. Right from juniors and or from the area at least, and they understood what it meant to play, and we say that and we joke about it, but it's something that's just an intangible that you can't fix. There's no solution for it. So no, that's 100% the biggest concern. I think as soon as you've still got a few leaders there, you've still got Stormaroo, who's had 100 plus caps. You've got a few voices who have been around. You'll just have to rely on those.
Brian Kaltak's another one, I guess. He would be the main one, yeah.
Alo Qual was has a couple of years, even though he left for a little bit. He's back. I don't know. There's a good starting lineup of players, enough experience at the club sprinkled in, along with the new signings. But as soon as you lose a few of those players, there's nothing. Like, I trust the next wave of players coming through the academy. So DeLima's on a proper contract this year. You've got Kasevsky coming back, who's been around and had a bad injury. So hopefully players like that can really step up, and players that have played for the academy side and do appreciate the setup and what it means to play for the club. But the biggest thing we've seen in signings that have succeeded is when they buy into the coast, right? You got it in Docker, probably the most. He loves it so much. He's secured for another 3 years. Part of the reason is that he's built into that lifestyle and everything around the club, and now he embodies that as well, which is bizarre coming from, the Brazilian 4th division like he did. So that has to happen with players that have come over. I don't see it happening as easily as it has previously. A couple of these signings, they could go either way, right? Like they could be here for a couple of years and become mainstays in the same way that Docker hopefully will. But it's, you're going to try to, bed in a few of these new signings to become those players, because as you said, Christian, there's just not many of them that still are around at the club, which is, definitely their biggest weakness heading into this season.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Just the lack of leadership really scares me. And it's something that we touched on when we watched the game against Buriram in the Champions League. Just even like looking at Pavlicic versus Vukovic in isolation, like there's a couple of times late in the game, they're 2-0 down, red card, they're down to 10 men. If Lucas Moragas is chasing back and Danny Vukovic is screaming at you to follow your man, you're running. You're running hard. But if it's Pavlicic and maybe he's not as confident to talk just yet in the team, it's worrying. And then if Trent Sainsbury is injured for an extended period of time, then you name the players, Brian Caltech, Stormberg, at least in the defensive line. Is there enough leadership presence there? I'm not so sure about that. And, I've been cautious, but I have said I've been worried about the Mariners just because, obviously they've done so well last year coming off an off season where their squad has been torn apart, but they're now having to do it twice in a row, Will. And I guess that's the question everyone wants to know is this one step too far? And perhaps people, as we say, we don't want to, predict that they'll finish too low because they've proven that they can turn it around. They've done it in the last few years, but it feels like the job is even harder than it was last year.
Yeah, I think with these players having left, you miss, and as we said in the previous kind of segment there, you're just losing. You're not losing the ceiling for the team. I think the ceiling for the team is still extremely high. I think you've just got, you lose the extra 10-15% in those little moments where a Danny Vukovic in your ear, perks you up and you recover that ball because you hear his voice and it's familiar and you have that trust in him, right? And you do anything for your captain like that. But I think that's you lose a little bit of the edge like that. I think over a season there's still potential to challenge for the title. I just think you fans can't go in expecting it. I think it's still definitely possible. I think the talent there, once it all will click as it did last season, I think it can still, still has the ability to be very exciting and definitely be in the conversation for top three. I think finals is minimum. I think finals gives the coast, people on the coast an opportunity to get around the club and kind of and have that experience. I remember when reaching finals was wild after the couple of years of wilderness there for a bit, and all they wanted to do was reach finals and have something to play for at the end of that season. So I think that still gives the fans enough joy and enough reason to follow the club and build on that, and the attendances will be up and everything like that. I just think you just have to be realistic about it. I think especially after we've seen what other teams have done, namely Sydney and Victory, in the especially Sydney in the transfer market, they've done a lot of business. So they're not favourites by any stretch of the imagination, but I think there's still a decent chance this season.
In terms of the crowd as well, just on that point, you mentioned, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, Will, where you admitted that the crowd, the atmosphere, the members aren't expecting too much from this Mariners side. Not that they don't want them to win, but just say if they don't make finals, for instance, they're not going to be like it's the end of the world because they understand the circumstances, what's happened in the previous 2 years. They've been on such a great run. Do you think for the club, is that going to be a free hit for them this season, that knowing in the back of their minds, it's not as if they're a Melbourne Victory or Sydney FC, for example, when you must win at all costs because the demands are so high. For the Mariners, it's a bit different. Do you think that works in the Mariners' favour as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, they've been the underdogs for so long. It's weird having this kind of this title of favourite and coming off the back of the seasons they've had. So yeah, there's a lot to they do their best work with their backs against the wall, I think. So they thrive in environments like that. So the pressure is off. I think you're not going to deter fans. The averages won't drop off a cliff the season after this one if they don't obviously back up what they've done in the last couple of years. I think, Jackson's built up enough credit. He's tied down for 3 years as well. So there's a sense of a project going on. I think, fans are definitely had their taste. They remember what it's like now to be up there challenging. And I think, regressing a little bit to where they're kind of more expected to be, it's not the end of the world. And I think it's, that's, a great, show that of what Jackson has done. He's kind of built this mentality around the side that it can, they can go on to do great things, but it's as long as there's, a few positive ticking movements, kind of, that's all they really need.
All right, very nice. Thank you, Will. We're going to go to the other side of last year's grand final up in Gosford now. Christian, the Melbourne victory.
Yeah, so, I mean, fast forward, a few months since that heartbreak in the grand final. Obviously, Tony Popovich has left the helm and in comes Patrick Kisnorbo. And, some arms are waved in the air saying, what are the club doing? Former Melbourne City man, helped the City win the championship a few years ago, their maiden one. There was a bit of taste in the mouths of a section of the fan base, it must be said. On social media, we all saw a few comments not in agreement with the appointment. But then when the Australia Cup rolled around, the first few games, Victory were playing some nice football. People were going, okay, they were starting to warm up to Kisnorbo. But then, the Australia Cup final arrives and Kisnorbo decides to make a few experiments, including leaving Azani out of the squad completely. And that's obviously been the main talking point the past, 7 to 10 days, is that, apparently there was a training bust up and now fans have they don't trust Kisnorbo again. I think that respect and trust needs to be gained again throughout this season to really get a sense of, okay, Kisnorbo is the man for this job. Because he comes into this role, the victory just came off the back of a grand final defeat. So in terms of the standards, the core players in this squad are still there at Victory. So it's not like it's a clean slate. It's not like the Victory in a rebuilding process like they had Grant Brebner in charge a few years ago or something like that. The expectations are up there to, make the grand final, win a championship, because we've touched on it countless times in this podcast that teams like Sydney and Victory are here to capitalise on these other teams who are investing more on the youth side of things. And for a club like Victory with such high expectations, I think surely this season has to be viewed as, a season where a championship is possibly on the cards. And in terms of the squad overall, I think Geordie Balladon and Ryan Teague in that midfield pairing, I think they'll be absolutely crucial for Kisnorbo's team and their setup moving forward. Maybe in that 4-2-3-1 formation, similar to what Popovich displayed last season and previous season during his time in charge, but just a bit more flair, a bit more attacking intent. There's not going to be much emphasis on the defensive side of the ball. As such, Kisnorbo, in a quote here, in his inaugural press conference, if I get it up, he says, "Our brand of football will reflect what you have come to expect of Melbourne Victory sides. We will be bold and brave, play attacking, quick football, and I will have my team ready for any challenge that stands in our way." So based off that, you're expecting exciting football. You're expecting the front third to be really dynamic, where last season there were a bit of struggles up front. Where were the goals going to come from if Bruno Fornaroli wasn't firing? And that was sort of one of the question marks when Fornaroli went through that bit of a dip mid-season and towards the back end. So, the Victory do have the pieces to really make something of this season. It's just Kisnorbo doesn't have a lot of time to, put his ideas in place, and they need results straight away. Otherwise, the pressure is going to really pile up on the club. Fans are going to start asking questions. It'll be interesting to see, what happens with the Azani situation. And there's a few other questions. Nikos Vergos, new signing from Greece. Obviously, he used to play for the Real Madrid youth setup. What happens with Fornaroli? Is it just going to be a straight switch game in, game out towards the 67th minute mark? Or will Kisnorbo experiment a bit and go with a front two maybe on occasion? The Australia Cup, we didn't see much of that. It was more the straight swap between Vergos and Fornaroli. So, there's a few questions there lingering. It's just, can Kisnorbo answer those questions in time before the heat really piles up?
Let's go to Kisnorbo first. I was listening to the For Fuck's Sake boys on their podcast. They've launched up again this year. And they talked about the appointment, and obviously there's the whole City Football Group aspect of it, which I agree a lot of fans are not happy with, especially after the Australia Cup final. But then they also made the point that Patrick Kisnorbo comes in as this very authoritarian manager. I know you said you talked in the press conference about attacking, flowing football, but historically he has been a manager that asks his team to work really hard, be very solid defensively, and then we can worry about going forward, right? So in those two aspects, he's very similar to Tony Popovic. And in fact, it's a very similar criticism to what FA are getting at the moment for picking Tony Popovic to replace Graham Arnold, right? It's a bit samey. So my question to you is, do you think that's true that maybe with Patrick Kisnorbo, you're getting a lot of the same things, at least in managerial style, maybe not tactics, but style to Tony Popovic? And is that even a bad thing, or just maybe a little bit of continuity help Victoria's case going for a championship this year?
Continuity always helps. I think Kisnorbo, from what I've watched from City the previous years when Kisnorbo was in charge, I wouldn't brand it as more sort of defensive football in a sense. And that's not to say Popovic was the same either. I know Popovic, obviously being a former defender, and Kisnorbo was the same, that they like to, set their foundations in defense. But I feel as though Kisnorbo, the contrast between him and Popovic is that in the attacking third, you see more of an identity, and you saw that during his time at City, where the play was more free flowing, whereas where Popovic was there, it was just a bit lost for answers at times, in a sense where you just didn't know where the goals are coming from because you had to rely on a couple of maybe moments of individual brilliance, whether it be Ozani or Mashash, to open the line. So I think that in terms of the system itself, Kisnorbo is definitely a better fit and a slight upgrade on Popovic. But I do agree with that sentiment where maybe in terms of the vision from the club, do go for someone maybe a bit different. Whereas, Popovic didn't win a championship with Victory. I know he was a few minutes away from it. It can be harsh to sort of allude to that side of it. But I do agree. But it will take time for Kisnorbo to install his ideas across. And we'll just have to see whether it all works out.
So Langerak's obviously, going to be probably instantly the best keeper in the league. But with Duncan, holding on until then, do you foresee any issues with that? Or, as Langerak does come back in, Duncan's obviously been, told about what will happen. A similar situation to Virgos and Fornaroli I had as well, where is Fornaroli going to be happy kind of playing second fiddle as he has so far early on? But just, expand on both of those situations with the keeper and the striker.
It's a good point, because I think this is the difference between a good coach and a great coach. Because just say, for instance, Jack Duncan plays out of his skin for the first few months of the season, right? And then Langerak comes in during that January-February period from his time in Japan. What does Kisnorbo do? Does he go with Duncan, who's been, playing in the form of his life? Or do you bring in Langerak, who I'm sure behind the scenes have said, okay, once you're in the club, you're going to be in the starting position, you're going to be getting the game time. So that's the balance that makes such coaches great, in a sense, compared to the good ones, because they can make those split-second decisions and the tough decisions at times. And I think if you were in that position, you probably have to give the nod to Duncan to keep that continuity, that consistency, because we've seen at times that, if a new goalkeeper comes in, then it can change the dynamics of it. I mean, we know Langerak's obviously more experienced, more talented than Duncan, but to flip-flop it around during mid-season, it can pose as a bit of a risk. So I guess it depends on Duncan's form, the way the defense is set up, how that communication is going. And Kisnorbo is going to see all of that, not just on match day, but day in, day out during training. And when it comes to that time, if it is a difficult decision to make, then going to be really fascinating to see which way it goes. But at the end of the day, I don't see how Langerak doesn't get in the side. Just based off the name, based off the signing, he's going to be, you feel, a real influential figure in that backline, but you never know.
With so with the strikers, Virgos and Fornaroli, you touched on a little bit, but is there any room for a system that incorporates both of them? Do you see that happening? Is it realistic?
It's a tough question, because you look on the flanks. I do feel as though there is a lot of depth there. So if you do go with the two up top, and if you play someone like a Valuple or Ozani on the wings, is that too attacking focus? You're sort of leaving the likes of Ryan Tegan, Jordi Valdon to dry, in a sense, in midfield, because you've got Mashash there as well, obviously. So one of them is going to have to miss out in midfield if you are going to play that formation, or you just drop the wingers in general, or you get someone like Valuple to drop back a bit, which he has done in previous seasons, I think under Popovich, where he's asked him to do a bit more defensive duties, and that's just, I guess, the role of Popovich, or his coaching style. I guess Kisnorbo might be a bit different, where he's going to really focus on the attacking side of the game. But based off the Australia Cup run that Victory had, like I said before, it was just more of the straight swap between Burgos and Fornaroli, where, especially in that cup final, Victory are really struggling up front, and he thought, okay, Burgos or Fornaroli, try and make an impact here, see what you're made of, and try and prove that you belong in the starting 11. But in terms of the top two, that's why I would have wanted to see a bit more experiment in the Australia Cup, because Kisnorbo said, with the Azani, I'm trying to experiment. Well, how about experiment in different parts of the setup as well? So, he hasn't had a real chance to do that. So if you do that during the season, you're going to have to make sure it works. Otherwise, it could backfire.
All right. They've got a lot going on off the field, Christian. We talked about Patrick Kisnorbo coming in from City, the Daniel Azani situation. But in terms of backroom stuff as well, we've learnt recently of the collapse of 7 Partners, which hold a minority stake in Melbourne Victory. Do you think whatever's going on behind the scenes there will have much of an effect, number one, on the playing group, and then what does it mean for Victory as a football club moving forward as well?
In terms of the first question, on pitch, I don't think it will have much of an impact on the players, if not anything really, to be honest. It's only a 19.9% stake that 777 had in the club. It's not like they've taken full ownership of them and it's an absolute disaster. So in that sense, I think you always hear it time and time again, whether it be in Australia or abroad, you see stuff that happens off field in terms of, for example, ownership issues, and the manager during press conferences say, the players are switched on. They're only focused on what's happening on the field and the training park. And I do truly believe that that's the case, because at the end of the day, the players just, obviously they get paid and they do what they do best, and that's on the field. And they let the backroom staff handle those issues, because at the end of the day, Victoria is still a massive club. We know they've got a huge, financial, I guess, backing or security is probably the better word to use there. But for the second point, what it means for Victory in the long term, I guess it depends where those shares get offloaded now. Obviously, with the reports, 777 now, not being able to, fund the club any further. They've still got that 19.9% stake in it, which a spokesperson said a couple of days ago confirmed that. So it's, where do Victory look elsewhere for that new investors for the club for that 19.9%? Again, that will all play out behind closed doors, but in terms of on the pitch, I don't see it impacting them too much.
Yeah, still plenty of questions to be answered. Of course, it might not even be Victory that decide where those shares go. I'm not sure how that process works. We know that there are liquidators in with these 777 football assets, to move them around. We also know that they had an option to expand their stake in Melbourne Victory at a certain point. Does that option then get transferred over to whoever picks up these shares? I think you're right, Christian. Definitely at this point, it won't affect the players, but there are still definitely plenty of questions to be answered. We're going to finish off part 2 of our preview with Auckland FC. I caught up with Chris Macpherson a little earlier. All right, Chris Macpherson, hello. How's it going? Auckland FC, talk to us.
Yeah, exciting times over in the land of the Long White Cloud, a second A-League franchise at long last, many will say, and it turns us into a what would probably be considered a properly dual nation competition, which is exciting, a dual confederation competition too, across Oceania and Australia and Asia. So really exciting, the Black Knights. I think there's a little bit of expectation around them. The setup behind the club with Bill Foley coming in, someone who's well known in the sporting landscape more broadly, has investment in a couple of different sporting franchises around, most notably the Las Vegas Black Knights in the NHL, the Golden Knights in the NHL. The Black Knights are Auckland. So it's going to be interesting. Obviously, sports admin, he's been quite successful with Vegas in the NHL. He came in and made an immediate impact, and there's a lot of conversation certainly coming out of New Zealand that there's similar expectation. They haven't mucked about in terms of laying their footprint. They've signed a predominantly New Zealand-based squad, which you would expect, with a few key international imports, bringing in Steve Corica as a head coach. Some question that, I think, purely because of his latter days at Sydney, but I think his latter days in a lot of people's mind has a recency bias, which has ruled out his earlier days and the success he did have there, both as a player and then as a manager. So I think that's a deliberate, pretty strong statement in terms of getting Corica on board and what they're trying to structure there. Some really positive signings. I think there's some interesting signings that we don't know a lot about when we have a look at some of the players they've brought in. But a couple of positive ones for me is bringing in Japanese international Hiroki Sakai. He's going to be a really strong point in their defence. He's played a lot at a top level. He's played at Marseille. He's played at Hanover. He's spent time in the J League with Urawa. So he's played the national side 70 odd times. So it's going to be a really key piece. He's going to be a key piece of a defensive platform they're going to lay. The big talking point, obviously, was the change in the transfer rules, which has allowed them to, on loan, sign Alex Paulson, who departed Wellington to go to the English Premier League as New Zealand's next big thing, and all of a sudden found himself straight back home in Auckland. So that was obviously quite a controversial and interesting piece, and I think it's going to add a really significant piece to that rivalry as they look to make their first imprints into the A-Leagues in their inaugural season. But yeah, certainly really excited to see what they can do. And as I said, a really Kiwi flavour to their squad. I also like the fact that, as much as many people might not recognise, the little bit of Pacific influence of bringing Dan Hall in, his Fijian heritage as well. That was a conscious step, I believe, from them as well to try and tie in. We haven't seen a lot of success in terms of Pacific nation footballers making it into the A-League. We've had a small handful, obviously Brian Kaltak for the Central Coast, so to have that tie, I think they'll be trying to, as well as a lot of New Zealand sporting franchises have over time, draw in that Pacific Islands support as well, which will be great to see. And it's an underrepresented element in probably the football landscape, and we look forward to hopefully that developing and seeing them partner in some of those spaces as well.
Yeah, for sure. I want to ask you about what you think the fan dynamic will be, because Wellington have had these games in the past where they've travelled up to Auckland and actually gotten really, really good crowds. And we're hearing that Auckland's season opener against Brisbane is heading close, if not towards a sellout as well. So it sounds like there's a lot of support there. I'm sure there will be a lot of people in New Zealand who will have supported Wellington Phoenix just because they were the only team in New Zealand, but now they have that choice. And we've kind of lived this a little bit when we've seen expansion teams in, Sydney and Melbourne, but now it's happening to a whole country. So there's a whole different dynamic to play out there.
There is a really different dynamic. It's interesting because, as you said, we've seen it here predominantly where it's split a city, and it's happened successfully and unsuccessfully. I think Sydney's probably the best dynamic of that. We saw Western Sydney, and it was a clear East versus West dynamic. And then Macarthur came in and kind of couldn't carve out that niche. We saw it in Melbourne. I mean, Melbourne Victory Royal is the dominant side. Then Melbourne Heart became Melbourne City. They've developed a following, not in the ilk of probably Wanderers. And then Western United, again, a bit like Macarthur, probably didn't have a generative representation of where they were actually from for a long time. I know that will hopefully come now, and whether that's too little too late, that's a story for another day. But this Auckland versus Wellington, it's a rivalry as old as time. It's the two big cities in terms of New Zealand. It's going to be a case where a lot of those, fans who are based around Auckland, I think will get on board. I think we'll also see a lot of fans coming from that Northern League, from the likes of Auckland City, who've been a real powerhouse in their national league there, and on the Oceania front at a club level as well. I think you'll see fans that will follow both those sides, so there'll be a bit of transition there, hopefully. And yeah, I think we've seen a really strong response to Wellington performing, and the key will be for them to get some okay results. If they don't perform up to the standard, they may find it hard to get those fans rusted on quickly. But if they can start with a few wins or some strong performances against top clubs, we saw last year the Cape Town was filling, Eden Park filled when Wellington went there. At the end of the day, both Australian and New Zealand football fans have one currency that they like to see, and that's results. I don't know they'll get lots of leeway on that. As you said, their early games will have good, strong attendance, and I can't wait for the first of the Kiwi Clash, or whatever name it's going to take. I know we threw a few around on social media in the early days in regards to what we're looking at, but it's certainly going to be that's the one I'm looking forward to, and that's going to give us a real mark of whether there's an instant rivalry there, or whether it's a manufactured one that's not going to take as quickly as we might hope.
I think the Western Sydney example is a really good one, because obviously what they did really well is they established an identity for themselves that was very different to the team that was already there. And you look at Auckland coming into the New Zealand landscape, and I feel like they're very much presenting themselves as the kind of top end, maybe how Melbourne City presents themselves towards Melbourne Victory fans, maybe a bit upper class, I don't know. And they just got the clean colours. They've got this successful guy who's come in with a lot of money. And it's strange to say, given the success that Wellington had last year, but it almost feels like they're coming in as the underdog, so to speak, maybe not in a completely football sense, but in a club sense and a rivalry sense, it feels like they come in with a lot of impact. And as you say, Auckland have made a big deal about engaging with the local community, which I'm sure will get a lot of local hands on board. But it's funny, just a new club that has no experience playing football at all, yet it really doesn't feel like this uneven balance towards Wellington like we might have expected when an expansion club comes in.
It almost feels like, and you always talk about, Sydney and Western Sydney when it first happened, it was big brother, little brother, right? Like it's that kind of vibe, Melbourne Victory, Melbourne City. It feels like Auckland have almost done enough to turn that the other way, where it's kind of like they're the perceived, establishment. And I think your analogy that you talked about there with Victory versus City, it's almost Wellington have sort of earmarked themselves in that community, that blue collar, that, sort of vibe. And Auckland appear to have almost gone the white collar vibe, the very polished, the very crisp, the very finished. We've got the money, we've got the structures. We're coming from the NHL to take the A-League by storm is almost the vibe, even though it's not exactly the same people. Yes, the ownership that sits behind with that Black Knight Sporting Group is, but it's not in terms of the actual people that are running the show. But that's the ilk that they've given. Like, we're coming here, we're not doing this by half measures. They've done everything. Seems very professional from the outside in terms of how they've gone about it. Even in a shortened window that they had to work, they were very deliberate. They made some Kiwi signings early. They brought Steve Corica in. They built this platform. Then they took a couple of players from a couple of different other spots, and then they've thrown in a couple of interesting ingredients, as I touched on in the introduction. When you look at Sakai, and the other one that I'm interested to see is Gallegos coming, the Chilean, who's he's going to come across as a midfielder. They're hoping that he's going to be able to spark some pieces as well, and that South American influence will be continue with May as well. He's had some success in the Uruguayan Primera. It looks like they're really setting a tone about how they're going to go about their football and how they're going to go about their business off the field, and really set themselves almost, as I said, as that. It's like they're trying to establish themselves as the big brother, even though they're the new kid on the block, which is an interesting, but it looks like a really deliberate tactic. And I think what that's going to do is not only establish themselves firmly in the heart of Auckland residents if they can start to get results and, people around that area, but it's going to firmly pit themselves against Wellington, because it's kind of a look at us piece. And, it's not a showing the deference and respect to not only an established side, but a side that's been very successful over the last couple of seasons.
How do you think that Auckland's introduction will change, not just the nature of like A-League competition in New Zealand, but football in general? Because now you've got two clubs there competing for resources, not just fan favour, but you've got, young New Zealand talent that will want to be playing in professional level academies and have paths to first team professional football. You're going to be competing as well to be the first New Zealand team to win the A-League. It feels like, as you say, it's like a little bit of a blank slate for Kiwi football. And now we're going again. Now there's a competition. There's really something to chase and earn.
100%. I think there's so many bits of, whether it's bragging rights or establishment rights, it's going to be, if you're a young New Zealand talent coming through the pathways, it was kind of, you had to default into Wellington or, jump on a plane and head somewhere else to take your next steps in your pathway. Now there's two options, and if you are, the next, Paulson or someone like this that's, really coming through the ranks and standing out at a young age, you're going to have two clubs on home soil that are going to fight over you. You're going to have two pathways. You're going to have options. It means that there's going to be twice as many young New Zealand footballers going through these A-League academy setups, professional academy setups as well, which is a great opportunity. I think we're going to see it not only uplift the output of the New Zealand input to the A-League, but we're going to see it uplift the New Zealand national side as well. Which I feel we've seen them start to emerge a little bit more as Wellington started to get stronger in the last couple of years as well. They're starting to put in some more consistent performances on the world stage. And I would say if we look back at this in, another 5 to 8 years, they will be firmly nipping at the heels of Australia and, starting to try and close that gap on us. They've seen us make consistent approaches on the world stage. It will be interesting as to, as they uplift, do they try and outgrow Oceania, and does that become a whole other story? But that's a long conversation for another day, I think. But yeah, it's certainly interesting. And as I said, I really hope too that they continue. Auckland have made some statements about it, that they can continue that focus and that investment on the Pacific Islands, because we've seen, as I said, I'll use Caltac and Hall as two of the great examples. These are two guys who weren't really on radars that long ago, but they've both got that Pacific Island heritage. Caltac was playing in Vanuatu, and now he's captaining the Mariners, right? Like, there's obviously more football talent there, and again, having more spots in New Zealand gives more opportunities for those players to not have to relocate all the way to Australia or further afield to pursue their footballing dreams. And we know the athletic talent that can come out of Pacific Islands and New Zealand. So I feel like it's still quite an untapped resource from a footballing point of view, and it's really exciting to see. And worst case, if they're having tough years, the two teams, there's always going to be Kiwi bragging rights on the line every time they come up against each other. And we know, the F3 is a great example of that. Newcastle in the last couple of years, Central Coast, when they're having their tough times, they grow another leg in those games. It's that it's that high point. It's you're running 11th, in the competition, having a rough year, and if you can knock off your great rivals when they're sitting higher on the ladder, or you're both around that same spot, that's enough to keep fans sustained for a few more weeks. So I look forward to the first of the Kiwi clashes and what that looks like, and who gets first bragging rights, and then it'll become an ongoing piece like all of the wonderful derbies that we have. And if you're a Perth fan, now you get 2 distance derbies.
You do, yes. I appreciate you using our terminology that we came up with as well, the Kiwi Clash. Unfortunately, the APL said no to that idea, so no commission for us. The Kiwi Classico, we're going to see 3 of them this year. It's going to be fascinating to watch. New team, new kids on the block. Really exciting times. Chris Macpherson, thank you.
Thanks, Bucky.
Well, while we're in New Zealand, a little update on the Wellington Phoenix as well. We've learnt since we did our preview on Tuesday that they've signed Stefan Kolakowski from Perth Glory, which I feel is quite a significant signing, Will. He's won 2 premierships and a championship with City, still only 24 years old. Ben Smith is reporting that Glory wanted to re-sign him. The player wasn't opposed to doing so, but was weighing up an overseas offer. Glory then filled their roster, the offer falls through, and now he needs to go to another A-League club. So in that respect, Perth's loss is Wellington's gain.
Yeah, and another player who's still, has such a high ceiling. I think we saw him light it up for City in the past. And it was a bit of a weird move when he initially did go to Perth. He was, shut out of the team for a long time. I think it was under Zadkovic, right? He just couldn't get a look in, and it seemed like an odd move as Perth was struggling at the time as well. And they had such an attacking player stuck in there playing for their NPL side. So a really good pick up there, and kind of unfortunate, as you touched on, Lockie, that it just didn't work out to stay at Perth. I think it's kind of was, everyone's feeling fine with that. It's nobody's, no burnt bridges there. But yeah, a really good pick up for Phoenix, and a player that could, get given some consistent minutes, and he did get that a little bit last season. Can really do some damage and rack up the goals and assists and be an attacking threat for sure.
Okay, jumping around a little bit. Hopefully you haven't noticed too many changes in our outfits as we've gone through this episode. But Melbourne City are through to the quarterfinals of the AFC Women's Champions League with a game to spare in Thailand. Poletti, they emerged 3-0 victors over the College of Asian Scholars on Thursday morning. There's only been draws in all the other games in their group, so they're on 6. Next best is on 2. So even with match day 3 to come in the group stage, they are through in top spot, which is great. It means they will host a quarterfinal match in Melbourne against a lower seeded opposition. So Poletti, only after 2 games in the group stage, they already have, you could say, 1 foot in the semi-final, which is incredible.
Yeah, I think that's certainly one way to look at it. Look, I'm not going to pretend that I had a chance to watch this game. Midnight start. We all know that I'm a team sleep person. And I mean, the idea of not having commentary as well, trying to watch a game on my TV screen at midnight, I would have fallen asleep watching this. So I figured, well, why even bother? Like, let's get the sleep. But I've been so worn out today, I haven't even had a chance to watch the highlights. But look, 3-0 victory. I'm going to assume it was a lot more dominant than the first game was against Bam Katoon, which is already a pretty dominant performance as it was. Melbourne City life seemed to be enjoying life under Michael Matriani. So very, very much a good result there. And I'm hoping that the AFC will announce those dates in Melbourne soon, so I can look at flight prices.
Yeah, great news. We'll get another recap for City when they complete their group stage in Thailand next week. We're going to bring it back to the A-League. One of the teams that we covered in Tuesday's preview was the MacArthur Bulls. We have some very intriguing news on them because FIFA has issued a transfer ban on MacArthur until Dwight York is paid compensation for his wrongful termination suit that was settled a month ago. Christian, in an Australian context, what this means is that essentially the Bulls can't register any more players. There's no domestic transfer window, all that kind of stuff, which is not so much of an issue right now because the start of their A-League season is already taken care of. But it will become an issue in January if the Bulls did want to bring more players on, and definitely going into the next A-League season in 25-26. So this report comes from Rolly Walter at The Age. He says that York is owed a touch under 300,000 Australian dollars The club declines comments. But the key point being here that if the compensation is paid, then the ban is lifted. So it's not some set in stone thing. This is avoidable if MacArthur wanted to be.
Yeah, you're right that this transfer ban won't have an impact as for now, but in terms of the reputation of the club, I just worry a bit because, fairly new club have come into the league and this isn't the first sort of drama that's happened with them off the field. They've got the gambling saga. Off the top of my head, there was a couple of others. Poletti, we'll touch on it soon, but from the reputation standpoint, just being such a new club and having all this commotion around you off the pitch, surely that doesn't present as a good image moving forward. Yes, I know it's not sort of in the control of the club for most of what's happened in terms of the past, sort of the negative events that's occurred. But at the same time, reputation is reputation, right? And it doesn't matter, how it comes about. If you receive bad headlines, then, if you want to increase your crowd numbers and increase the interest in your club, then that's surely going to have nothing other than a negative impact. So hopefully from that point, it doesn't impact them too much. But yeah, I mean, we just hope there's not a few injuries. Otherwise, it's not going to be good in the January transfer window, is it? To not get new players in.
So, Poletti, the club haven't made an official comment yet. So, for example, we don't know the reason why they haven't paid. We don't know if they're exploring other legal options, if they're just trying to figure out what their different options are, maybe in terms of making a payment. Who knows? So we have to sit tight on that. But look, it feels like just a nudge along from FIFA to say you owe this, past coach money. We have a responsibility to ensure that the clubs playing under our badge are doing the right thing, and so this is the suspension that we're going to place on you until you fulfill your duties.
Look, I'd hazard a guess and assume that this is more of a checks and balances thing, right? That this is not that MacArthur don't intend to pay the money. I would just assume it's looking at other options. If you could avoid paying $300,000, right, you would. Like, not that any of us will ever see that much money in our bank accounts in our lifetime, but if you had $300,000 and someone went, okay, you need to pay this to X person, well, you do everything you could to avoid paying it, right? So, but like, I literally just assume this is a checks and balances thing. I assume that, if they have to pay it, they'll pay it. Not any sort of avoidance. I disagree with what Christian said. I don't think that from a reputational perspective, this will have any sort of impact on their crowd numbers or fan excitement or anything like that, because as long as the team continues to improve under Stoyowski, and we mentioned this in sort of our season preview, the idea that in Australian sports, winning supersedes everything, right? If your team wins, they'll come. Like, Stephen violation, but if you look at the Penrith Panthers, right, over the last few years, their crowds have absolutely increased to the point that their stadium's getting knocked down and getting a rebuild to permanently increase its capacity, right? Because everyone loves getting behind a winner in Australian sports. So,
but they've got to do that first, right?
No, they do, and I have no reason to believe they won't. Now, could they be slightly impacted by a transfer ban? As you said, injuries. Touch wood, that doesn't happen. But, ideally, they're looking the goods so far. I have no reason to believe they won't continue to win as the season goes along. I think they'll compete for finals. With that, the crowd numbers will grow regardless of what's happening off the field, unless, it's something major is happening, or like some report comes out that there's a very toxic culture within the club or something like that, right? Like, that might get people to stay away. But for the most part, winning supersedes everything. And that would see an increase in crowd numbers. So I don't think it'll have like any sort of reputational damage. It'll have an impact on the crowd as its own factor.
All right, watch this space. Will, for the first time in what seems like an eternity, on Tuesday night, logged into Soccer Twitter, and absolutely everyone was being positive about Australian football for a change. It really is a rare sight sometimes. But this was in reaction to the absolutely brilliant 20-year anniversary video, a promotional cut that the APL put out the other day. If you haven't watched it, go online. Everyone was talking about it. It's absolutely brilliant. It's narrated by Ellie Menjum, who works with Copper 90 and produces football documentaries and football shows. And it just perfectly summates the silly, beautiful league that is the A-League with the tagline, our leagues. It feels just very right. It really is our league. It's not the best football in the world. It's not the best players, but it is ours. It's the one we play in summer. It's the one that has teams coming in and out of it. It's the one that has a final series. It is the Australian League, and I think they encapsulated that pretty well.
Yeah, as you said, Ellie did such a good job hosting. I think we need him involved in a lot more content as much as possible. And I heard they flew him, around the world just to do this, which was awesome to see. But yeah, definitely, I think everyone after watching it was ready to run through walls to defending this league because that video just hit home every important point and really captured the feeling that you have every time you support this league and through all the ups and downs. And I think they really captured that well. You saw moments such as Jason Derulo popping up in a half and half shirt.
We should not have everything. We needed a warning for that jump scare, all right?
Just everything about what it means to be a football fan in this country. And I think as you said, Lockie, it was probably the first time I've seen soccer Twitter that united and just everyone kind of adding their own messages and retweeting support of that video. So no, they absolutely nailed that. And I think the league has a new marketer, a new marketing person in charge of this kind of stuff, and off first glance they've done an excellent job. So hopefully the rest of the marketing is kept being run like this because absolutely nailed that one on the head.
They're leaning into all the memeable peak A-League moments, the famous Wanderers offside goal, Aurelio Vidmar calling Adelaide a pissant town, like just going so hard in it. It's what they need to do because it's how all fans relate to the league, and they've grown up with these kind of moments. So
I liked the addition of in terms of memorable moments that they got the footage of Costa tying up the net with the tape. I thought that was a nice little touch. Just before we move on from this, I'm going to channel my inner Jacob Stevens here. It feels like he has a place on the podcast tonight. Two things that I've noticed about this whole 20 years campaign, and I'm not the only one who's noticed them. This idea of lumping in the A-League women's with the A-League men's, despite the fact the competition didn't start till 3 or 4 years later. They've only just come close to only just getting a home and away season in full this year. I know we had the 22-game season last year, but one of the games was taken away for Unite round, so this is a full home and away season this year. The players still aren't paid professionally, and they should be having their own 20th anniversary, right? It shouldn't be getting lumped in with the men's just because the APL decided that the competition needs to have the A-League branding on it. I love that. I understand where you're going with this, Lockie, but also I do love that. I saw you're getting ready to jump in and just shoot me down.
I wasn't going to shoot you down. Can I put my point before you continue? Okay, I just think there is a fine line, I think, that the APL have to balance because they want to celebrate the 20th anniversary, but do they have the budgetary, room to make separate campaigns? So I understand what you're saying, and it isn't the 20th anniversary for the Women's League, but it probably, you still need to include them in the promotion of the league, obviously, right? So I understand where you're coming from, but it's a difficult position.
I'd like to see them have their own separate campaign. I understand costs are probably an issue. And all I want to say is if the APL goes even, they go just as hard in a few years' time for the A-League Women's 20th anniversary.
Well, that was, unanimously agreed is a very good direction. I do want to talk about a new piece of Network 10's digital strategy that launched this week. The weekly kickoff had its first show on Wednesday. It has a rotating cast. This week it was Tara Rushton, Grace Gill, and Daniel McBreen. And I do have a few complaints about the show. Go watch it if you haven't seen it. At the end of the day, more A-League content is good content. So it is good. It's a good thing that they are doing this and they're making more A-League content. However, there were a few glaring issues off the bat. First of all, it was absolutely impossible to find. I was scouring Paramount Plus. I was scouring 10 Play at 5 p.m. in the 15 minutes that followed. I couldn't find it absolutely anywhere. 10 Football, all of the hosts had to tweet out a direct link and the path of different buttons that you had to press to get there. Look, that's it's not a great thing for a launch. You would have lost a lot of viewers there. It is something that can be easily fixed, which is a good thing. The audio quality of the show is not what it should have been for a TV production. In the first half of the show, there was a lot of background noise. You could hear people talking and banging things together. And then in the second half, there was a music track that was overlaid on top of the conversation, which, at least in my opinion, shouldn't be anywhere near a show like this where you're trying to talk and the hosts are having a conversation around football. So maybe the background noise got worse and they had to cover it. I don't know. But even leaving those technical issues aside, I want to have a conversation about the content of the show itself. And perhaps this is me being a little bit misguided as to what I thought the show was going to be or what it should be. But I was really hoping that it would be a bit more of a show where the experts of the game analysing, engaging in deep conversation about, the latest news of the domestic game of the A-League and the Socceroos and the Matildas and things that really impacted us on a local level. Instead, I feel like what we got was a little more surface level. There was only 23, 24 minutes of show to fit into a half-hour TV block, so the conversation was spread a little bit thin. But then, towards the back end of the show, they finished with Ange Postecoglou, which I understand is probably going to rate more, but we really are starved of that A-League specific content, which is what I would have hoped they would have gone for. And then just some quick-fire questions and stuff with the panel on the show, who's going to win the premiership, who's going to be the Johnny Warren medal winner, that kind of stuff. I just feel like they're missing an opportunity here, and that content is great, and it's perhaps a bit more suited to social media content, and maybe that's where the idea of this show has come from, that kind of social media, cut it into different segments and really get the multi-purposing out of it. But I feel like they could have been a lot more effective and created a lot more value. And maybe this is just a personal preference of mine, but I think of the football media that we do have, a lot of it is the kind of sitting around the couch, light kind of matesy conversation about what's happening this weekend. But I think what we desperately need more of, and it's what we've tried to do with our show here as much as we can, is just to try and actually take ourselves a little bit more seriously. And let's talk about the issues of the game in a lot of depth and have the conversations and bring on experts, not like us. We haven't played the game or anything like that, but act as a genuine service to the fans who want to stay engaged throughout the week and not more of this kind of surface level fluffy stuff. So that's my piece, and it's nothing against the presenters either. They're likely just doing their jobs and probably had little to no creative control over where the show actually goes. And these are people that have had great contributions to the football space. But I would have just hoped, Christian, we really need some more hard-hitting style football media, and I think I was just let a little bit down about perhaps what the direction is that they chose. And if they chose that direction, then my argument probably shifts as to that, that's not what we need in the first place.
Yeah, and I guess the counter argument to that, I agree fully with what you said, but a half an hour show, I think it was only 24 minutes that they could fit in. You mentioned. So how are you supposed to sort of cover the whole sphere of, what's to come throughout the week, including, previewing what's to come, and then obviously analysing this throughout the season when it does occur, when, the A-League is in full gear. There's so much to talk about, and yet they've got this little window of opportunity to talk about everything. And you can't, how do you fit everything in 24, 30 minutes? It's very difficult to do so. But yeah, in terms of surface level, yeah, we obviously don't want that. We want, more, I guess, in-depth conversations. Those people on the panel there, they know their football, right? They've got the knowledge. They're not there for no reason. So we're not, having a go at them. But it's how can they promote it better? How can they, I guess, instill ideas to, I guess, market it better? Because like what you said, it's more of a social media, I guess, campaign, if you want to call it, to try and pinpoint, different snippets, 30-second, 1 minute, just to put out on socials. But really what they should be targeting is, the broader audience, and what we're craving is, in-depth football knowledge of, what's to come, and analysing, previewing, all of that sort of stuff. So, from that standpoint, it was disappointing.
Do you have an opinion on this, Will? Do you think I'm asking a bit too much?
No, it's. I mean, the only thing I was going to say was that it maybe it's a bit early doors, and I haven't watched it yet actually, so I'm not sure exactly what they got into. But I'm sure they'll obviously have more content when the season kicks on, and it's the first iteration of the show. I'm sure it's somewhat of a little pilot episode, and things will get better. So a lot of the changes that you said you were looking for are pretty easy to come by. So hopefully it does improve. And I do agree with the overall landscape. It needs more of that culture. And I saw even there was mention of a Saturday show between games or before the first one. Ed Cavalier floated around. So you just return Santo, Sam and Eddie, and Ed will
I saw someone post that on social media. Actually, they photoshopped the heads of Tara, Tara Grace, and Daniel McRae, and then just put their faces on it.
We all want that, we all want that era back. But it's good that they're looking for that extra content on top, which is
exactly. And like the content is good, and I think like the Ed Cavalier thing, I love Ed Cavalier. I watch Have You Been Paying Attention every week, and he's great. And he would absolutely make a great football show. But Poletti, there's still that gap. Especially like the Saturday is the perfect opportunity. Like you're in the slot between two games of football. You can analyze one and then preview the next. That is the prime opportunity to talk about the nitty gritty of football. But I feel like maybe it's a network team thing, but have we not learnt our lesson about catering to the casual audience of A-League fans? I feel like we've talked so much in the last few years about really diving in on that hardcore audience and make sure that they're served a product that they want to continue engaging with, and I don't think this is quite it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Look, I haven't seen it yet. Based on, as I said, there's a reason I didn't watch the Melbourne City game as well. All right, I've been incredibly busy those last couple of days. But based on what you said, I do tend to agree with you on the surface. Before I get into why, I just want to say I think you're selling a short here. Haven't had anyone who's played the game. We have a championship-winning goalkeeper with us right here.
No, not at a pro level, all right.
Yeah, so we have a championship-winning
goalkeeper.
We have a championship-winning goalkeeper with us right here. But look, in terms of the idea, I understand they're probably because this is not only just airing online, it's also got its own television slot on 10 Bold, so there's a lot more in terms of the powers that be at play, and it's probably, okay, TV people want to see one thing, football fans want to see another, try to get that compromise in the middle. I would very much like to see them take an ESPN FC approach, not in terms of the presentation of the product, but in terms of the way it's put together, where it's like, okay, you record all this sort of different content, because they record a lot of content for different markets. Like, at least the last time I was, actively watching that show, they had content on the Australian version of the show that aired here that doesn't air in other markets, and vice versa. And so the idea of, okay, you record all this content, some of it makes it onto TV, but the rest of it makes it onto like a full show that you would put onto, say, a 10 Play or Paramount Plus, that if people actively wanted to seek it out, that they could seek it out. So people like us, we'd want to see a 45-minute version of that show, right? Whereas instead of the 24 minutes that we got this week, because it's half an hour with commercials. So I like the idea of there being two different versions of the show, where it's like, okay, some of the content makes it on big, free-to-air television behemoth that people will come across and they'll watch. But then for the hardcore people who want it, there's a secondary version of the show that they can watch that's exclusively online.
Mm. Yeah, all right. Well, there you go. That's my rant on the football media again. We seem to tackle this every little while, but that's just the world we live in at the moment. But that will do for this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Another chunky one. If you have listened all the way through, please let us know. We actually want to know if this kind of longer episode length is something that people actually want, or is the shorter stuff a little bit easier to consume? We want to know, because we'll produce the content that you guys want. But Christian Montegan, thank you tonight. It's been a bit of a long day today, so thank you.
Thanks, Lockie. Yeah, been a long one, but no, pleasure as always.
Will Booth, go Socceroos.
Up, up, up.
Okay. And Poletti as well.
It sounded like he was getting ready to say up Cronulla, and then you realised, oh wait, no, hang on.
I kind of froze there a bit. Yeah, I didn't know what to say.
Oh well, it's
Buffering.
I had a
in real
long day
life.
too. I thought I was gonna. I had a long day too, and I just don't appreciate not being. My feelings aren't as valued as Christian's.
well, I know everyone's feelings are valued, but I said
stooped
it to
that
Christian
low.
first because I thought it would follow through.
That's fair. 2 articles published.
Yeah.
Countless hours spent live streaming here, podcasting, man.
Oh, man,
And Poletti, you joined us for the second half of the football. Congratulations.
Yeah, I feel like I achieved something today.
All right, we're going to head out of here. We'll see you next week. Catch you for the Japan game. See you then.